Greetings to you from Phoenix, Arizona once again. This is Tony E. Denton coming to you from my office. Let's launch immediately now into a study of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17. I'm going to be going a little quickly with this particular one because it's a little bit longer. I hope you'll hang in there with me. Amillennialists and premillennialists use 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17 to teach that in the future, Jesus will materially appear in the sky in such a way as to be visible and physically rapture the saved from the planet to meet him in the air, and then to be materially changed and taken to heaven. So our question for today is this: is this what Paul meant when he penned this verse within this context? Let's look at 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 17 that says, "Then," that is, after the dead in Christ rise in verse 16, "we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord." The phrase caught up comes from the Greek word harpazo, which means to seize, according to Strong's, Thayer's, and Bowers. And if you look it up in a Septuagint, Leviticus chapter 6, verse 4, and Judges 21, 21, and 23, you'll find some interesting information there as well. W. Vines and Bowers specifically says that a suddenness is involved in the term harpazo. Kind of makes you think about the twinkling of an eye concept in 1 Corinthians 15:52, doesn't it? Well, it should at least, I think. An examination of harpazo reveals some interesting information. It's derived from the Greek term from which we get our word heresy. The term heresis, which Vines says refers to a choice, from the verb heromai, meaning to choose. Strong says that heromai means to take for oneself, that is, to prefer or choose. Check out what Bauer says about it in Matthew 11, verse 12. In other words, it's a choice based on one's preference. There's more. The Greek term harpazo also carries with it the idea of oneness, that is, making those things or people which a person prefers and chooses one with himself. Making them one with himself, implying, of course, that they are or become one with each other in the process. Let's illustrate with a couple of biblical examples from the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament. In Job 24, verse 19, harpazo is used of assimilation of water and sinners. As drought and heat consume the snow water, so the grave consumes those who have sinned. The word consume and consumes is harpazo. So, as drought and heat harpazo or consume the snow water, so the grave harpazo or consumes those who have sinned. See, there's that concept of oneness. Two or more things become one. They integrate. They assimilate. Likewise, in Genesis 37:33, harpazo is used in Jacob's statement about what he believed happened to his son, Joseph. It says, "A wild beast has devoured him." Devoured is harpazo. Also check out Ezekiel 19:3 and 6 and Ezekiel 22, verse 25, where this concept of assimilation, of consuming something, and so on, is very emphasized. So, harpazo does indeed carry with it the idea of assimilation or of gathering or making two or more things into one, bringing them together, that much so. Eventually, you should do a study of harpazo in relation to Judges 21 through 23 to the wedding. There's a connection in Judges 21 with the concept of a wedding, like with the lamb marrying the bride church, in the word harpazo. It's an interesting little thing for you to check out if you want to take the time to do that sometime. Now, combining these two ideas of the seizing of something, the choosing something by preference, and bringing things together as one, making a choice and making one, that's what I believe Paul was talking about here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Not only did he unite dead saints and living saints together in one body with him, but by fulfilling his promise of coming against the Jews, wiping out over 1 million of them, as well as their precious city and temple, he also clearly made a choice concerning who comprised the remnant, Romans 11, verse 5, and who did not. Check out Daniel 7:22. Daniel 7:22, it talks about the judgment and how that the Lord, when he came to judge, would make a separation. He'd separate the goats from the sheep, so to speak. He'd separate those rejectors of him from the acceptors of him. So harpazo includes this concept indirectly, because you're choosing this group over that group. So there's a choice that's made, and the ones that were involved in that choice were put together, were assimilated and placed together, seized together, caught together. In Ephesians 1 verse 10, Paul wrote, God would gather all, the Greek word panta, gather all together in one in Christ. The very thing Jesus prayed for in John 17, 15, 21, 23. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us, I in them, and you in me, that they may be perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have loved them as you have loved me. See, it's talking about all the saints, not all people, period. It's talking about all saints. How they would be made into one. That is, the corporate body that would then be, of course, be the bride and the spouse of the Lord. In Matthew 24, verse 31, Jesus said that his angels would gather together his elect. Incidentally, the verse immediately before that one, Matthew 24:30, speaks of the trumpet blast, just as the verse before our text here in 1 Thessalonians 4:17. Verse 16 speaks of the trumpet blast. Now, how can we be consistent and say that Matthew 24:30 and 31 is AD 70, but 1 Thessalonians 4 isn't, when you're talking about the same concept with the same language? In Hebrews 10:25, Paul wrote these apostatizing Christians, encouraging them to not forsake or abandon our gathering together, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. The only other place where this exact same Greek phrase is found, and by the same writer, by the way, is in the next reference, both of which I now believe refer to the gathering of Matthew 24:31. In 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 1, Paul wrote, the coming of the Lord and our gathering together to him. Same language. Hebrews 10:25, 2 Thessalonians 2:1, the only two places where that type of language is used, and I believe by the same writer, and is referring to the coming of the Lord. Hebrews 10:25, people will agree that they approaching there is talking about Jesus coming against Jerusalem. But when it comes to 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 1, they say, oh, that's talking about a whole other thing. But they're both talking about the gathering together of the Lord's people. He would gather together his people, those who had accepted him and had become therefore his bride, while he would reject the others and destroy them. The Christ rejecting Jews, Israelites. There are two other pieces of important information in relation to the Greek word harpazo. Number one, the term harpazo without a suffix such as ano, which means away, or para, which means from, or pros, which means toward, or kata, which means down, or ana, which means up. That word harpazo without any of those suffixes doesn't imply a direction. Merely a seizure, as in clasping or enfolding, which leads to number two. If we retain the word caught, what Paul more accurately said was caught together, not caught up. There is no direction involved in harpazo without a suffix that indicates a direction. It simply means caught, as in caught something together. For hama means together or at the same time. That's found there with harpazo, hama, harpazo, this caught together or at the same time. In fact, in this very context, chapter 5, verse 10, he used the same term again when he wrote of how the saints would live together with Christ when he came, regardless if they were dead or alive at the time. Why would they do that together? Because they would be his bride. That remnant would have been completed and become the bride. Besides, even if we leave it as caught up, haven't you ever gotten caught up in something without being physically moved from one place to another? Certainly you have. And by the way, this gathering together was something which occurred spiritually. that is, invisibly. In Luke 17, when Jesus was speaking once again about his AD 70 coming, he said that the kingdom, that into which all would be gathered and made one with God in and through Christ, Ephesians 1 verse 10, would come without observation, verse 20 of Luke 17, leading to the next word of our text, 1 Thessalonians 4:17, to consider. What about the word clouds? That's the next word. Clouds. It has no definite article. Well, consider how the following corresponds to this text. Using the Bible to interpret the Bible, we go to the Old Testament to discover that clouds, when associated with the Lord in a positive manner, as in our text, are a symbol of his Shekinah, Hebrew for presence. The word Shekinah means presence. So the clouds, in a positive manner, refer to the Lord's presence. Clouds, when associated with God in a negative manner, are a symbol of judgment, such as with Egypt in Isaiah 19 verse 1, and Nineveh in Nahum chapter 1 verse 3, and Jerusalem in Zephaniah chapter 1 14 through 18. Exodus 14 verse 20 is a case of God's cloud being both negative for the Jews and positive for the Israelites. No matter how you look at it, clouds were a sign, a symbol of the presence of God. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Exodus 14 both. As long as sin was between God and mankind, Isaiah 59 verse 2, man could not be allowed into the presence of God. Or, to put it another way, he couldn't have a face-to-face or eye-to-eye relationship with God. 1 Corinthians 13, 8 through 12, which I have a study on that as well on my website. So, in order to accomplish his scheme of reconciliation for mankind, and at the same time keep himself separated from mankind, God hid himself in a cloud. Exodus 13, 21 and following, Exodus 14, 19 through 20, Exodus 16, 10, and so on, allowing only the high priest once a year to approach this cloud over the mercy seat in the most holy place, Exodus 19, 13, and following. Consider these key occasions. Number 1, when God dedicated the tabernacle in Exodus 40, he did so by means of a cloud, so that not even Moses could enter it, verses 34 through 38. And number 2, when God dedicated the temple in 1 Kings chapter 8, he did so by means of a cloud that kept the people away. That is, a cloud that they weren't allowed into, verses 10 through 12. So, clouds represented hidden deity among men, so men weren't allowed to enter it. And clouds were used when deity dedicated the temple and tabernacle of God. Now, however, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul wrote of a time when those who accepted Jesus as God's Messiah would be allowed to enter into the cloud of the Christ of God. Why? Because they were the spiritual temple of God's dwelling among men, dedicated by the perfect blood of his own Son. That's cool, isn't it? They weren't allowed into the temple or the tabernacle cloud before. Now, because of Christ and what he has done, at the time of his return, when he finished all things that had to do with salvation in Hebrews 9:28, then, at the resurrection, they could be in the cloud with the high priest in reference to relationship with God. So we'll get into a little more information as regards clouds when we get to the word air after the word meat in this text. So let's look at the word meat actually here. The word meat comes from apentisen, and it's actually a great follow-up of our discussion on clouds because it carries with it the very condition of two or more people coming face to face. That's what Vine says. However, what I want to consider with you about the term is just about as interesting. Moulton and Milligan's Vocabulary of the Greek New Testament says of this term that it seems to have been a kind of official welcome of a newly arriving dignitary, a usage which accords excellently with its New Testament usage. And Chrysostom, who lived in the AD 300s, supports that very idea. In other words, this term, the Greek word for meat, apentisen, pictures meeting a VIP either at the entrance to the city to receive him in, or meeting him just outside the city to escort him in. In fact, in the only other two passages this term is used, we find perfect confirmation of this meaning. In Acts chapter 28, 14 through 16, we read, "We went toward Rome, And from there, when the brethren heard about us, they came to meet us as far as Apiphorum and 3 Inns. When Paul saw them, he thanked God and took courage. Then we came to Rome. So certain brethren from Rome met Paul a ways before he arrived in Rome and accompanied him the remainder of the way. And appenticent is the word that's used in that text. The only other time it's used is in Matthew 25, verses 1 and 6, where it says, Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. And at midnight a cry was heard, Behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him. So what were they expecting to happen once they met him on the way? Were they expecting him to turn around and take them back with him from whence he came? Or did they rather expect to meet him in order to escort him on the remainder of his way to the wedding feast, his destination from whence they came? Obviously, the latter is the true idea. In fact, you might check out a book called The Diaglott, Greek Interlinear. It has a great illustration in it there. There are also numerous Old Testament passages like these. Here are a few in Judges 4:18, 1 Samuel 18:6, 1 Samuel 30:31, 2 Samuel 10:4 through 5, 2 Samuel 19:15 through 16, and 24 through 25, 2 Kings 4:25 through 26, 2 Kings 8:7 through 9, 2 Kings 9:17 through 21, 2 Kings 10 verse 15, 1 Chronicles 12, 16 through 17, and Jeremiah 41:5 through 6. All of those fit so perfectly into the picture we're talking about here. And by the way, 2 other things are relevant. Number 1, just a little food for thought. I believe there's a direct correlation, a type-antitype situation here between Paul's appenthesis and the holy convocation, that is, the assembly or meeting on the Sabbath rest day in the Old Testament. Just check out Hebrews 3:17 through 4 and verse 10. Number 2, I don't believe the Bible anywhere teaches that Jesus' coming was to be with saints. The only 2 places this idea can be found are in Jude verses 14 and 15, which I'm convinced are speaking of the holy angels, because hagios meaning merely holy ones. You can check that out with Mark 8:34 and Matthew 25:31. And 1 Thessalonians 3:12 through 13 is the second place, which I'm convinced simply mean that Paul wanted the Thessalonian saints to be found holy along with the saints in all other places when Christ came to gather his people together, which corresponds to Paul's wish for them in 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23, where he says, May your whole spirit, soul, and body be preserved at or until the coming of our Lord. Yeah, I'm going a little bit quickly here with this. If you have trouble with anything, go back and look at my notes. I'm following the notes almost verbatim here on this audio for people who are listening to things like this in their cars. So when you get home, if there's something you are having trouble with, just pull out the notes, this speech on my website. Anyway, so if our thought process is accurate so far, and of course I believe it is, I spent a lot of time on this, we have Paul informing and encouraging these suffering Christians by reminding them that they, note his usage of first-person pronouns throughout this paragraph, those who'd be alive when Paul arrived, evidently Paul believed such to be possible, as Jesus did in John 21:22, along with the saints who were dead, would be made perfect. Okay, say it one more time. We have Paul informing and encouraging these suffering Christians by reminding them that day, those who be alive when Jesus arrived, along with the saints who were dead, would be made perfect, which corresponds to Hebrews chapter 11 as well. But how would they be made perfect? In a face-to-face Shekinah meeting with deity, the Lord's Christ, when he returned from his work of smearing his blood on the once-for-all eternal heavenly mercy seat in the true most holy place with salvation complete, Hebrews 9:24 through 28. And as you know, the sins of the people under the old covenant weren't considered moved forward until the high priest returned from within the tabernacle. That's Leviticus 16:15 through 24. One more thing. What we've said here so far corresponds again with words of Jesus in John 14, verses 3 and 23 specifically. He said, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am you may be also. And where was he? In his Father, verse 20. Verse 23 says, my Father and I will come to him who loves me and whoever keeps my word, and make our home with him. Which then perfectly leads into our consideration of the next word in our text, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17, the word air, A-I-R. The Greeks had two primary words for air, aranos and air, A-E-R. The term for air here in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 is not from aranos, found 284 times in the New Testament. Aranos is the name of the Greek god for the celestial part of space above the earth, the part containing the stars, and is correctly translated as heaven or heavens every time in American Standard Version, such as Matthew 24:29, where it speaks about stars falling from heaven. Rather, the term for A-I-R in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 is from the Greek word A-E-R, found only 7 times in the New Testament. A-E-R is the name of the Greek god for the terrestrial part of space, immediately above the ground. Okay? There is your difference. Aranos is the god for the celestial. A-E-R is the god of the terrestrial. That refers to the air just above the ground of something terrestrial in nature instead of celestial. The part that contains that which we inhale. Okay? The air that we breathe. Supporting this background for this term, Thayer defines air, A-E-R, as the lower air, as opposed to the higher air, or the atmospheric region, oranos. And Strong says it's from the Greek verb A-E-M-I, ami, which means to breathe. So you have the words even coming together. You have A-E-R for the air above the ground, and A-E-M-I for breathing. Can we breathe the air that's in the aranos above our atmosphere? No, we cannot. We can't breathe the celestial air. It's this air where we live and breathe. In fact, we get our word aerobic from A-E-R, combined with the Greek term bios. Aerobic refers to the oxygen or air required by biological organisms to live. And an interesting side note is this. God, A-E-R, was also called K-H-A-O-S, chaos, from which we get our word chaos, and actually refers to a gap, such as a gorge, ravine, or chasm. As a matter of fact, in the Septuagint, Xeos or chaos is the Greek term for valley in Micah 1 verse 6, Zechariah 14:4, and is the root behind the term chasma in Luke 16:26 for the word gulf between the blessed Abraham and a tortured rich man. A lot of really cool connections here, okay? This breathable region was called a gap because it made up the second heaven in Greek mythology, the region between the place of darkness under the earth for the unseen spirits of the dead and the place of lights for the unseen spirits of the gods, bringing to mind, of course, a picture of Luke 16:19-31. In fact, as you've likely already deduced, our word chasm finds its root in the word chaos. Chaos today refers to disorder, confusion, and madness. Why? Because the valley, gulf, gap, or chasm is produced by division. And my MS word thesaurus gives such synonyms as break and discord for the word division. Division isn't always a totally negative thing, for as they say, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. John 7:43 tells us that even Jesus caused division among the people. But you can see there the concept of a gap, and that air is connected to that which we breathe. Between the earth, between the terrestrial and the celestial, is that breathable gap of air. Anyway, out of the other 6 verses in which air is found, A-E-R, the only one which seems to have any bearing on our text here in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 is Ephesians 2 verse 2, about which Bauer says in his lexicon, the kingdom of the air in which spirit beings live, the ruler of the kingdom of the air being Satan. Likewise, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament says, in line with early Christian thinking, Paul links with this the idea of an organized kingdom under the single ruler, Satan, Ephesians 2:2. So, in the light of letting the Bible explain the Bible as much as possible, let's consider this passage also written by Paul. Paul clearly trying to picture to humans something of a spiritual nature, wrote about what first century Christians were doing with or in Christ during that time. Even though they had to suffer much physically for it, they weren't fighting against physical enemies, but against spiritual ones through Christ, their captain. Hebrews 2 verse 10. Ephesians 2, 1 and 2 have him saying, "You Christ has made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience." Then in chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, he said, "Stand against the wiles of the devil, for we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." So, what does air refer to here in Ephesians 2? The spiritual realm. And what was the desire of the devil or Satan? To maintain control, to maintain a hold on sin, death, spiritual and eternal separation from God due to sin, which in turn found its strength in the law. 1 Corinthians 15:56, that which he was consequently also striving to maintain. So, when Jesus returned to put a final end to the law and allow for full and complete reconciliation, he thereby effectively annulled the power of Satan and therefore the fear of sin and death, that is, eternal spiritual separation from God. Hebrews 2:14 and 15, and confer 1 John 3:8 with that. By the way, the word destroy in 1 Corinthians 15:26 means to render powerless, translated as without effect or made of none effect in other passages. So the point here is that at Jesus' coming, many visible events transpired to demonstrate the truth and fulfillment of events prophesied that would be invisible to the human eye. Luke 17:20. That is, the demise of Jerusalem and Judaism, which perfectly fulfilled the prophecies of the prophets and Jesus, was tangible proof of at least two things. Number one, Jesus had won the victory in the spiritual realm over sin and death, or sin death. And number two, he had fulfilled his promise of, spiritually, returning to earth, that is, the air, A-E-R, gathering all his saints, Jew and Gentile alike, restoring them to fellowship with deity in a face-to-face meeting in his Shekinah clouds, the glory cloud of presence, now within their air, which corresponds perfectly to Luke 21 and Revelation 21. Okay? Notice Luke 21, in the context of Jerusalem's destruction, it has Jesus speaking of the powers of heaven being shaken, verse 26, and a sign of the Son of Man coming on a cloud with power and great glory, verse 27, around which time he said that redemption, verse 28, and the kingdom, verse 31, would arrive, fulfilling all promises and prophecies, verse 22, within their generation, verse 32. Wow. This meant that while their heaven and earth would be removed, that old covenant system, his new heaven and earth, the new covenant system, would arrive and never be removed, verse 33. Check out Isaiah 9, verse 7, etc. with that. Then, Revelation 21 speaks of this consummation of all things at the time when a new heavens and earth, a new administration, verse 1, a new Jerusalem and holy city, verse 2, a new tabernacle, verse 3, came down out of heaven from God, resulting in God dwelling among men, verse 3. Verse 10 tells us that the angel showed John the great city, the holy temple, the holy Jerusalem, called the church in Hebrews 12, the kingdom that they were in the process of receiving, Hebrews 12:28, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory or the presence of God. Then Revelation 22 went on to inform its readers of how that, A, within this new city of God, they would see his face, that is, be in fellowship with him, verse 4, and B, within it would flow a river of life for the healing of the nations, verses 1 and 2, meaning, as verse 15 teaches, that those who murder, etc., are outside the city. So when Jesus returned, Hebrews 9, verse 28, with salvation, and married his bride that he had brought together, that remnant that he had brought together, he then chose them over the Jews who had rejected him. He married her and thereby brought heaven to earth. Heavens and earth came down to us, thereby allowing God to come as well and live with us and be with us. We would be his temple here, as well as his being our temple here, not somewhere else. So when Jesus, as the high priest, left the true most holy place to bring salvation here, he opened the doors of the most holy place and then incorporated the saints on earth into that kingdom, that most holy place. So the most holy place is still in heaven, so to speak, in a realm outside of our own, but it also includes us now, that which it did not do before. A quick interesting side note is the apparent connection God made between this heir and covenanting. Notice a comparison between Exodus 19, 4 through 5 and 1 Thessalonians 4:17. To the Israelites he said, I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will, keep my covenant, and you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. To the Thessalonians he said that they be caught out from among others to meet his son in the air, and would thus be found with the Lord. So there's somewhat of a covenant concept being indicated and implied here as well. But that's, again, as a side note. One more short side point about air here, A-E-R. If, as recent tradition holds, the universe, along with its air, combustible oxygen, will be literally burned up, then how can we always be with the Lord in that air? That doesn't make any sense, does it? We can't. So the heir here must be figurative of his kingdom coming to and existing on earth spiritually. After all, Jesus was supposed to receive his kingdom, Luke 19:12, and then come in it, Matthew 16:27, 28, and 1 Timothy 4 and verse 1. See, it's to be brought here, so that we could be in it here, even though we're alive in physical bodies. With reference to timing, that which must be considered in order to determine a correct interpretation of any given end times passage, let's not leave this verse without focusing on Paul's usage of the first person pronoun we. Okay? We. When Paul, who lived in the first century, wrote this letter, who was he addressing in the mid-AD 50s? Paul answered this in his introduction. Verse 1. He said, Paul to the church of the Thessalonians. Then, throughout the letter, he used pronouns you, us, we, numerous times, referring, of course, to them and him. He wasn't addressing folks 2,000 years later. Interestingly, numerous, probably even most scholars and commentators, etc., agree that Paul, due to his usage of the first-person pronoun in 1 Thessalonians 4:17, as well as other places, expected Jesus to return in his generation, that is, Paul's generation. But instead of denying what Paul was clearly expecting and saying, as most amillennialists do, they just say that he, this inspired man, was mistaken. That's terrible. Preterists, however, instead of denying what Paul said or accuse an inspired apostle of being in error, believe that what he predicted came to pass just as he meant to indicate. Well, let's move on to some adjacent context as we're finishing up. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 4. So after verse 17, 4th chapter, in chapter 5, verse 4, Paul said, you Thessalonians, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you, the Thessalonian brethren, as a thief. Who didn't have an excuse of being overtaken by the day of the Lord? The Thessalonian Christians. Why? Because they not only knew the signs of Matthew 24, they believed in the Lord who spoke them, meaning that they had no reason to let anything bother them, 1 Thessalonians 4:13, or cause them to believe the critics, scoffers, and persecutors, 2 Thessalonians 1:6 through 7, and chapter 2, 1 through 3. If the Lord wasn't expected to come in their generation, what was the point of these letters? It makes no sense at all why Paul would have spent all the time he did writing these two letters if they weren't expecting the Lord to come in their generation. 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 15 says, this we say to you by the word of the Lord. That is, the subject matter of this passage was something that Jesus himself spoke about. And where do we have a record of his speaking about this? Matthew 13, Matthew 17, Matthew 24, Matthew 25, Matthew 26, many of which we'll consider right now. So, let's move on to the remote context. Mainly by merely reading various passages and noting how well they correspond to what we've noticed about 1 Thessalonians 4:17 in particular, let's read the positive ones first. Matthew 8 verse 11, Jesus said, "Many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." Arnos. In Matthew 24:30 through 31, Jesus, just before he said that things would be fulfilled in his generation, he said, "The sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth," that is the word gaze for land, "will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. And he will send out his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." Matthew 25 verse 1. Right after he spoke the words of Matthew 24, he likened the kingdom during that time to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Check out verse 6 in chapter 22, verses 2 through 10 of Matthew. In John 11, 51 and 52, the high priest that year prophesied that Messiah would die for the nation, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Sounds very much like the remnant. In John 14 and verse 3, Jesus told his disciples, "I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am you may be also." Likewise, in his prayer to his Father in John 17:24, he said, "I desire that they also whom you gave me may be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory which you have given me." John 17:15. Jesus even prayed for the opposite of what many say today. He said, "I do not pray that you should take them out of or rapture them from the world." In Ephesians 1 verse 10, a verse that I look at as a summary concerning all things eschatological, tells us that in the dispensation of the fullness of the times, God gathered together in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and which are on earth in Christ. In 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 1, Paul wrote of the coming of the Lord and our gathering together to him. That is, their gathering together to him. Not us today, 2,000 years later. They're gathering together. Hebrews 10 verse 25, Paul warned those who are falling away to not forsake the coming of themselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhort one another so much as the more as you see the day approaching. They were to not forsake the Lord and go back to Moses. By doing that, they would be forsaking their part within the corporate bride of Christ. They would be taking themselves out of the remnant. No, 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 1 is the only other place this exact same phrase is found. And just as day is singular, assembling is singular. Meaning that there were just as many assemblings as there were days under consideration. For perhaps as long as 2,000 years, they were looking forward to this gathering of this day. A single gathering of a single day. Not talking about Sunday morning comings together. Or, coming together every Sunday morning and such like. Now here are some more negative ones. In Matthew 3 and verse 12, John the Baptist spoke of the positive and the negative sides of Jesus' coming. He'll thoroughly purge his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn. Speaking of the same idea, in Matthew 13:31, Jesus said, "I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." Then in verse 41, just before he referred to Daniel 12 verse 3, a prophecy about the things that occurred in the first century, he said, "The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness." Lastly, in verses 47 through 48, he said that the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which, when it was full, they drew to shore, and they sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but threw the bad away. See, all of that is about the caught together, the catching together of the saints, separating them from the Christ-rejecting Jews, and so on. With all these passages in mind, we can add 1 Corinthians 15 into the mix by considering the following chart. In conclusion, and you'll want to go to my notes to see this chart, but in this chart, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, and Matthew 24 are paralleled. You can see in 1 Corinthians 15 about Christ coming, 1 Thessalonians 4 that the Lord himself shall come, the sleeping in 1 Corinthians 15, the sleeping in 1 Thessalonians 4, the trumpet sounding in 1 Corinthians 15, the trumpet sounding in 1 Thessalonians 4, the dead being raised in 1 Corinthians 15, the dead in Christ rising in 1 Thessalonians 4. Okay, the trumpet all sounding, all that's together. Okay, nobody seems to have a problem, 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4 being parallel. But Matthew 24 becomes a problem for them. Matthew 24:27 has the coming in the parousia. 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 have the coming in the parousia. Matthew 24 has the clouds. 1 Thessalonians has the clouds. Matthew 24 has the sound of a trumpet. Before it states in verse 34 that the generation would pass away where all these things would be fulfilled. The sound of a trumpet happens before that. Then in 1 Thessalonians 4 there's the sound of the trumpet, just like in 1 Corinthians 15. We have the gathering together in Matthew 24 verse 31 before verse 34. Then we have that also in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. We have the day or the hour in Matthew 24:36. We have the times and the seasons of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 1. We have the thief being spoken about in Matthew 24. We have a thief spoken about in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Matthew 24, it speaks about them being all taken away. And then 1 Thessalonians 5 is sudden destruction. Matthew 24, watch. 1 Thessalonians 5, watch. The parallel between 1 Thessalonians chapters 4 and 5 and Matthew 24 are very significant. Especially since a lot of the things that are found in Matthew 24 that parallel 1 Thessalonians 4 are before the statement that all these things would happen before this generation passes away. Now you put them all together, you have 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, Matthew 24 all paralleling. So that brings 1 Corinthians 15 into the picture of also being in the first century, not in our future today. We have the coming spoken of in all three places, the trumpet spoken of in all three places, the raising of the dead in all three places, the saints, that is, the living saints being changed and being caught, and the angels gathering them in all three places, the coming in the clouds and all of that. It's amazing. But you'll want to see that chart right in front of you to get that much more clear than what you can get it from my trying to talk through it here. So check that out when you have time. And that chart pretty much encapsulates and concludes everything that we've been saying here since we began this talk on 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 17. So thank you for your time, and be sure to check out asightforthelord.com and write to me if there's any questions or any comments you'd like to make. Thank you.